Welcome to the Humanity Mosaic Podcast, exploring authenticity and connection with Dr. E. Thank you for joining us today as we explore issues that affect our relationships in today's world. And now, welcome to today's episode with Dr. E.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to welcome you to the show today because the guest that we're going to be talking with is Carmen Spagnola. And Carmen is a trauma recovery practitioner. She's a clinical hypnotherapist, and she calls herself a kitchen witch. Carmen whips up all kinds of amazing remedies for us to be able to practice ways to increase our resilience and to be able to be in the world when things are not going exactly the way we might have them go. Carmen has been an author, a practitioner of working with all types of people who have been struggling, and she is wildly successful in the work that she does. She is the author of Spells for the Apocalypse, and it is practical magic, practical practices for really difficult and turbulent times. Carmen Spagnola is a rare jewel in today's world because she has the time, the patience, and the love in her heart to try to elevate all of humanity, to bring us to where we need to be in order to be able to move forward. Just a few moments of time with this amazing woman will leave you feeling like you can do it. You can move forward, you can improve and heal your life, and you can heal the trauma that you're carrying around as a result of things that may have happened that you're not even aware of. We all carry some what we call ancestral trauma, and we all carry wounds from our childhood that we've never healed. But this amazing young woman is just what the doctor ordered. And I'd like to welcome her to the stage, Carmen Spagnola. Hello, Carmen. I'm so excited that you're here with me today.
Dr. E, it's such an honor. I feel very excited, a little bit nervous, but I'm very honored to be here.
Absolutely no reason to be nervous. I mean, of all of the many people that I have interviewed for this podcast, I have to say that when I sat down and started reading some things about you, I was like, oh my God, what are we going to talk about? We could just talk for days and it would be an absolutely amazing conversation. But there are so many things about you and the work that you do, what you're putting out into the world that are just, it's not only making a contribution, but it's fascinating. It is the life that you have lived, the life that you are living, the work that you are doing. There's just so much there that I was overwhelmed in a good way to see someone who is making that contribution. I understand you're a single mom. And
well, not anymore. I have a wonderful partner and life partner, and we are definitely we are, as the British would say, we're stuck in. We are in it, and this is the one that I've been, I guess I would say, collaborating with on human relations and interpersonal neurobiology for a decade now. So I a lot of what I have learned has come from being in the trenches in marriage.
Wow, that is lovely. So is this, it's not a new relationship. It's one that's been going on for a while.
Yeah. But I guess 15, a little more than 15 years now.
Oh.
And we have a great relationship with my child's dad, my child who identifies as trans. And he, my ex and my husband have just managed to create a really lovely friendship. And they're both guys that really enjoy, a good deal. And so if they're driving on the road and they see something that's in the free pile, they'll text the other guy and say, hey, I think you could really use this table or whatever it is. And they do a lot of collaboration, but I think that has come again, because not only I've always been attracted to people with like good hearts,
Yeah.
but capacity for change and growth, and to put the greater good ahead of the individual ego or need. So I've been lucky in that way. These relationships have been corrective experiences from how I was brought up, which was not like that.
Well, that is beautiful. And that is such a gift. And it is a rare gift, unfortunately, because we know that in relationships, and particularly when children are involved, if people can't find a path to friendship and have healthy relationships, at least for the sake of the children, there can be so much harm that is done, as you well know, because as a hypnotherapist and
Mhm.
someone who works with people, of course, who have dealt with a fair amount of trauma in their lives, we know that so much of that trauma goes back to our childhood. But
Mhm.
I really want people to hear about you. I found your life, not just your life's work, but your path to be fascinating. So I want to do a quick rewind and I want to know about you. I want to know, you know, where did all of your passion for um, people, for social justice, for being a force in this world, how did all of that begin for you?
Well, I grew up in the very first years of my life. I was living with my mother and her three sisters and my grandmother and my great grandmother in a two-bedroom house where my grandmother had her beauty salon in the garage. And so for the first, 6, 7 years of my life, I inhabited a world of women. And these were women who had been, essentially abandoned or had left abusive relationships. They were
Oh,
people who were making their way outside of the world of men. And so I think I had this like little germ of a seed that I felt like a child of the cosmos. I came from women and the stars. I didn't really have a sense of what would it be to have a father. As I got older, and there were men who came into my life, my stepdad, etc. I started to become more exposed to what I would now look back and call intergenerational trauma, unresolved childhood wounds, and that resulted in abusive behavior, addiction, etc. When I was in high school, my mom essentially, who was a dental assistant at the time, she had the administrator of a small private school that was an all boys school that was integrating girls. It was bringing girls into it. It had been an all boys school for like 100 years. And she was cleaning his teeth and he was talking about the school and she thought it sounded so amazing, but we had no money. And so she basically said, "You need to interview my daughter. You need to interview my daughter. I think she needs to go to this school and be one of the girls to integrate." And I think my mom, came from a long line of plucky women who was
yeah.
not going to take no for an answer. And when I did get a bursary, a scholarship to go to that school, I became surrounded by a world of men. And now I was trying to function in this very, different world. So I think I have certain things in my background, like a very strong protective field, a very strong sisterhood, a very sisterly kind of nature that I came in with. I also think I understand how to navigate patriarchal structures. And I also think I come from working class. And so that does something with your attachment. That does something with your way that you relate to other people. And for me, I became more avoidant. I became more fortified for a long time. And then when I finally had my child, I just had, it's like Dr. E, it's like there was a light switch in me and I just flicked it. I just decided that I wanted to pivot. I wanted to pivot this intergenerational legacy of kind of, kicking the trauma ball down the road.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to do something different. And so I decided not to marry somebody that was going to be that safe choice, but that I didn't feel a real, like we were on the level with each other and I couldn't really fully be myself. I certainly couldn't have shared the trauma I'd experienced, just like was not enough emotional capacity there. And then that's when I became a single mom. I was pregnant by myself and made my way in the world. But I think for my child's sake, I really dedicated myself to understanding the neurobiology and the interpersonal neurobiology of trauma and repeated patterns, and also of how power, class, oppressive systems shape our nervous system as well. And I guess partly because I have a child who identifies as trans, but also has, other diagnoses, is neurodivergent, has their own forms of medical disability. I I just realized that in order for my child to have a better world, it really was going to come down to who do I want to be in these oppressive systems? And how do these oppressive systems show up in my marriage, in my parenting, in the school, in, my community? And how can I be a force for shining a light on the oppressive systems within us, the settler within us, the identities we carry that we would prefer not to look at? How can I shine a light on them? And what I realized is so much of it is very unconscious and subconscious. And that's why I work very much with the subconscious realm as well as the greater than human realm. I do believe that there's something bigger than us, and whatever name you call it by. I prefer to think of the greater benevolent forces as being a caring container that wants for us to, get along, be well, do well. So I try to enlist unseen forces as well as our own kind of individual consciousness. So I try to teach, and I also try to use a lot of magic in how I create change. And I'm trying to create the world that I would want my child to live in. And I don't think I'm ever gonna, well, what's the saying? I may never sit in the shade of the tree I've planted. Like, I think these are very big, long-term goals that I have, but it feels very worthwhile because I think humanity, this sounds so grandiose, but I'm gonna say this to you because I think you'll get it. I think humanity depends on it. I think our humanity, the quality of our humanity depends on it, because in collapsed times, we are going to experience more suffering. And I'm not particularly attached, to be honest, to the futurity of the human race as an animist. I think we are one of many species, and you know, uh, I think we are going to make it through, but not as many of us as we would like in the next few hundred years. But what I want to be carried forward is the best of us. I want the best of humanity to make it, I
So
want the best of
important.
us to make it.
So important. And, it's not going to be happenstance. It's not going to just happen without some intentional work, some intentional focus on how do we move forward. Carmen, can I ask you, how old were you when your son was born?
I was 28.
28. Okay.
Yeah, my Saturn return. I'm pregnant. I'm calling off the wedding. I'm I really
Yeah.
feel like there's something big about this. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing, because so very often when it comes time to make these really hard decisions in life, we don't have enough confidence in our intuitive gut, what our brain, I talk a lot about our three centers of intelligence, what our brain is telling us, what our heart and our emotions are telling us, and what our gut wisdom, what the body is saying about a choice that has to be made. And it appears to me that all of that kicked in for you in a way where you made a choice that has allowed you to move forward in the world, doing the things that you were intended to do. And had you made a different choice, you would be going down a very different path. So it's
Oh, absolutely.
it's pretty fascinating how those sentinel moments when we have to make a choice, we don't have any idea at the time how it's going to affect the rest of our lives, the trajectory of our lives. So here you are now, with all this work that you're putting out into the world. And of course, you are part of the Social Justice League, as I call us. You are a love warrior who is fighting for the best of mankind to evolve, the best of humankind to evolve and move forward, and to wake up and to become present and aware. And right now, we are living in times where so many people are trapped in fear. They're absolutely paralyzed, and have no idea of how to move forward. I cannot tell you how many colleagues and friends I have who have lost jobs, who don't know how to make that next step, who are now experiencing the really negative effects of the intergenerational trauma and of their own trauma that was ignored for so long, and they're frozen in place. And I teach all the time that there are certain things that I call paralytics, and fear is one of them. When you just get into a state of being fearful, you can freeze and do absolutely nothing. Fear, anxiety, worry, just recognizing that you have to move past that. And I just think that you are highly qualified to give some advice about people who are trapped in that fear right now. That don't see a way forward, that don't know how to address their own trauma, and don't recognize that it's their own trauma that is also triggering a much bigger fearful response in terms of what's happening in the world right now. Can you speak to that a little bit and just offer some pathways to actually wholeness and being able to move forward?
Well, what you're describing in this moment of time, I would call collapse. And if I were to define collapse in a pretty simple way, I would say this is the converging emergencies of large scale cooperation dilemmas for which there are no simple and swift answers. If we could collaborate at that large scale on something like climate change or the rise of fascism, or et cetera, in a really tidy, efficient way, we would have done it by now, because there's so many of us who are tracking this and very concerned about it. So what we actually have are predicaments. And predicaments are not like problems. Problems have a solution. That's how you know it's a problem. It has a solution out there. But a predicament is something that only has a response. It's something that we've gotten so far into it that no matter what we do is going to have both negative and positive consequences. So we're weighing something quite complex. And this is where we get very stuck. That's at the largest collective scale, globally, planetarily.
Correct.
That creates a freeze response in the individual as well as the collective. When there's a freeze response, it gives nefarious people and powers a vacuum or a moment that they can step in. So as you say, it's so important that we move past that. But when we see abusers in power, when we see narcissists in power, any of us who have been abused, any of us who are recovering from our own trauma are going to be triggered as well. So it makes so much sense that many of us are in that freeze response. And the freeze response, of course, doesn't necessarily look like immobility all the time. It can also be a functional freeze where you are throwing yourself into something else, like throwing yourself into work, throwing yourself into your renovation, like whatever it is. It's like something else to manage the anxiety of what is underneath, which is a profound shock and a profound violation, something that is so in violation of your basic sense of decency that it's too painful to look at. And I really believe, and this comes to not just from my own experience with, I've been a hypnotherapist for a long time, working specifically with trauma recovery, as well as a somatic trauma recovery practitioner for many years. So, and because I work so much with groups, I'm talking thousands of people. It's not just from observing thousands of people. It also is through our recent neuroscience studies, which the last 15 years, it has been prolific what we have learned about the nervous system and interpersonal neurobiology. My nervous system impacts your nervous system.
Correct.
What we know is that without profound acknowledgement, we will be limited in how far forward we can move. We will always be a little stuck. We will always have a lot of drag on us if we don't actually acknowledge reality. So one of the tools that I've created is a book called Spells for the Apocalypse. And in it, I have 13 emotions that we might feel when we are overwhelmed by life. Overwhelm is just one of them. It could be anxiety. It could be stagnation. It could be despair or dread or disquiet. All of these have a little essay about what it's doing to us on that biological level, neurobiological level, and then a ritual to help us acknowledge what is coming up for us and how our particular response in freeze, our particular response to collapse, what it needs to be acknowledged to move forward. The other half of the book is around the remedies. So practices, I would call them resilience routines that we can do to increase capacity to be with the realities. And when we do that, we not only increase our capacity to mobilize in the face of fear or dread or anxiety, but we also increase our capacity for joy, celebration, awe, all these pro-social sentiments that we need in order to, again, send the best of us forward into the future.
It's very aligned with the work that I do with the Enneagram, because as you well know, we are energy and we put energy out into the world, and getting people to understand their own hardwiring, their own energy, helps them to be able to understand, okay, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And if I understand it, I can work with it in a different way. I can work with it in a much healthier way. But you talked about, resilience practices, things that, rituals, things that people can actually do. So let's talk about someone who has just lost their job. And they honestly believe that it's just over. There's nothing that they can do. They've lost their job. Let's say they're in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're looking around at the landscape and saying, there's nothing out there for me. There's no place that I can go where someone's going to hire me with this particular background. Now, you and I know that that's not true. You can, of course, call in you can manifest negative just like you can manifest positive. But can you share a practice for someone who's feeling rather hopeless right now
Mhm.
about being able to bounce back and to
Mhm.
go from survival consciousness, into a consciousness of resilience and of thriving? What
Mhm.
might be a little practice that they could do, get up every morning, and what
Mhm.
what are they going to say or do that's going to help to build their own sense of resilience?
Mhm. This would be like my triage for somebody who just lost their job in the midst of this. It's still the first 100 days of this American administration. So, that there's more to come. So we cannot afford to, well, as a Canadian, like the metaphor is like we can't fall asleep in the snowstorm, right? We
No.
can't go, I'm too tired to carry on and fall asleep in the snowbank. It's like, no, you've got to stay mobilized. So although in the bigger scheme of things later on in their journey, well, in the book, there are some other things I would do, like acknowledgement. There's a ritual for acknowledgement. There's also a ritual for hope. You said they're feeling hopeless, but that's not what we need right in that moment. In that moment, we just need to mobilize a little bit. And this is something I do. Well, I just hosted a ritual for this one I'd recommend for somebody who just lost their job. I just hosted it yesterday in my Numinous Network, which is like an online um, uh, community of practice. So we did the bee seaweed. So seaweed, like a kelp forest,
Yes.
because so this is a remedy for balance. When you've been knocked off your balance, you've had a shock like that. When that happens, I think people will say like, "Oh, I've got to get grounded. I've got to get centered." But honestly, when there is such instability in the world, when the sands are shifting, metaphorically, groundedness is overrated. I would say I wouldn't go for groundedness. I would go for fluidity, be water, be seaweed. And so with this
Mm,
exercise, we wake up, we stand, and we imagine that the horizon line is actually in our body. If we were standing before the ocean, we would imagine that the ocean is everything. If we had a line from hip to hip, the ocean is everything below, and everything above is like a starry midnight sky. And so that's the first place I'd start is lower your center of gravity right to that spot. And then gradually allow that imagery to shift until you become part of the ocean. And so this is where we use seaweed. Imagine if you were like a piece of bull kelp, the kind with the big balloon at the top and a very long tail. And we imagine that our feet on the floor as we stand are like rooted at the floor of the ocean. The ocean as the womb of the world, where currents come, maybe a log comes, maybe a boat comes. Instead of being knocked over, we let it go by us and we literally just move with the currents, but we keep that weight at the bottom. The top is fluid, the top is moving, and we soften. It's a global micro relaxation. So, what I love about this exercise is when you are in freeze, literally the primary somatic exercise is to literally just stand up. Literally just stand up. If you're lying in bed scrolling, if you're at your screen reading the email, whatever it is, you just stand up. And that sends signals to the most ancient parts of our brain that I am not prey. I am not prey. And then just, moving forward, walking forward, looking forward signals to your body, I am not prey. So that's all we need to do is just stand up, come out of that freeze, mobilize a little. And then I would say, just tell yourself, be seaweed and allow yourself to become like bull kelp. And you'll find that the balance is in always staying slightly in motion.
yes.
So balance isn't being totally still and rigid. It's that you are kind of always fluid. You even just moving with the rise and fall of your breath like waves on the shore. All of these tiny little somatic practices are sending the signal to your brain. I'm not prey. I can mobilize. I can move if I need to. I can get out of the way. I can, be nimble. But at a time when there's just so much instability in the world. I think shifting the metaphor away from being grounded, we can't trust the ground under our feet. We don't know when the rug's going to get pulled out. So instead, be seaweed. That would be the mantra I would offer that person.
I love that. And Carmen, one of the reasons that I love that is because even the word resilience at times feels exhausting. You know, it feels like I've got to pull it together again. I've got to stand through this storm, stand and be solid. I can't allow myself to be knocked over. And my teaching is very aligned with yours in as much as I'm constantly telling people to flow like water. You know, water has its own magical power and magical language. And if we do enough study and research about the elements, then we begin to understand that life doesn't just happen to us, it happens for us. So these things that happen are often aligned with our own growth. And I'm saying to people who have lost their jobs now, you may have lost something that you thought was so important to your survival, but there is something coming that if you allow yourself to be fluid enough and open enough to accept it and to go with the flow, you're going to find yourself exactly where you need to be. And being where you need to be, where you're intended to be, is always a good path to follow.
Right.
So, you know, calling out, don't just feel like you have to stand rooted and grounded and centered to weather this storm. Be able to flex, be able to bend, not break. You know, it's so important for so many of us right now to understand that the small things that you're talking about are not small at all, because
they're not small at all.
No, they make huge shifts in our being.
And water is very efficient.
Yeah.
And it is very efficient at finding its level. Yeah. Whereas earth, you know, that's not its forte, right? Peaks and valleys with earth. Yeah.
Very true. That is very true. Well, this is just amazing. It's so helpful. I have a question for you, for all of my listeners who are afraid of the word witch.
Oh, yeah.
Just talk a little bit about the word, you know, in terms of what that really means. And I really want women to hear this, because living in the times that we're living in right now, they're not really able to take us out and burn us at the stake. But, you know, we went back into the past a little bit. Yeah. We'd all be, you know, we'd all be kind of standing there being consumed by the fire.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's such a fascinating history to the burning times you're talking about. Certainly, they pre-existed well before the Salem witch trials, which, you know, have a certain lore in America. But as someone, I'm Canadian, my background is Scottish and German. I've always been fascinated by the burning times. And this was really when the word witch became a slur. And it was a slur used against primarily women, but also people who were gender nonconforming, people who were sympathizers, we could say, you know, who were religious sects that were egalitarian between the sexes. So I'm thinking of the Cathars, also the Romani people. So anybody who was resistant to a dominant norm, which at that time was that time and now is a Christian supremacy, but certainly the church reigned supreme. and for, quite a long time. So we're going back 1,000 years now, but we still see the term, this is a witch hunt, used today. That is the term witch was a slur applied to women who either owned their own property or were independent in some kind of way, were healers, were midwives, but also were organizers, community organizers. Back in the medieval times, women made up more than 50% of the population of the guilds. That, when we think of guilds, it's like butcher, baker, candlestick maker, right? Women were part of all of those things. And when they began to enclose public lands, when they started to favor, the wealthy over a communal kind of tending of what we called the commons, it was the women who rose up and rioted. It was the women who incited the bread riots. It was the women who incited the labor strikes. And so, of course, they needed to silence the women. And so at that point, even something as simple as an accusation of being a witch meant you needed to prove your innocence. And if and anyway, there's some wonderful books I highly recommend. Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici, who is a fabulous socialist writer, prolific in her study of the history of the witch hunts and how they overlap with capitalism and enslavement and the slave trade, etc. So I proudly identify as a public witch. I not only because I do magic, because I work with the elements, because I'm an animist, but because I believe in collective care, because I believe in the power of a united working class, because I believe in compassionate responsibility for our neighbors, because I believe in stewardship of the land. So if you're a person who believes in those things, I mean, maybe you should take an internet test, because I'm sure one will tell you you are a witch. But I'm very proud of it.
I like to educate. And so what happens, of course, as we well know, is that we are carrying the baggage that goes along with language and practices, and we're bringing that baggage forward without unpacking it, without looking at where it came from. I'm a consummate student of looking at Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary, and looking at the way that really the boxing of these powerful, amazing women, but the limited amount of information that we've been allowed to have access to about their lives and their contributions. And I look at all of that, and I'm speaking to specifically now to women and to the men who love us as women, and to all people who identify as non-binary. But I'm looking at all of humanity and saying, do your homework. Do your homework. We're living in times where we need to go to a much deeper level of depth around what we've been told and what is really applicable in the times that we're living in. There's nothing new done. Things are doing some shifting and shape shifting and form shifting. But if you really do some investigation into the role of women and what we have done throughout time, and what we will do now, but the importance of coming together in a sisterhood, in solidarity, and moving away from anything where we're tearing each other down. That has to stop. And the only way it stops is if we really take the time to understand one another. And I believe that your work is actually putting into action ways that people can become healthier within themselves, so that when triggered by someone else, by another woman, you can be aware of what's being triggered, what's going on with you, what you're carrying that is creating this reaction. And for us all to learn how to be less reactive, but more really intentionally responsive. And we can't do that without doing the work.
Yeah, well, and profound acknowledgement of the patriarch within, right? The one who would seek to take someone down a notch or control. Like, this is what oppressive systems do, is they make us police ourselves. If we feel we're going to be safer in proximity to a dominant power, then we are more likely to police the other ones who might, make it worse for us. Or, and again, this is like very basic disorganized attachment. It is very difficult to feel secure when you live in a disorganized and abusive overculture. So when, the person at the very head of your nation is a convicted felon, it totally makes sense to me that there are a whole bunch of women out there whose nervous systems have been shaped by the fear you described in the beginning, and this is what we call in trauma recovery traumatic entrapment.
Right.
Where the only way to get out of an abusive relationship is to actually get closer to them. It's like Stockholm syndrome.
Yes.
It's like reverted escape. You get nicer to the abuser so that it's not so bad for you, right? So it totally makes sense to me that they would do that. But also we can do these other things within ourselves as like witnesses. Rather than judging those women, we can look at the ways that we police ourselves with how we look, with how young we are, with, how we perform our femininity, etc. We can all use a good dose of unhooking from the shame of being a woman. Like, I'm not ashamed to be a witch. I love being a witch. I'm proud to be a witch. And me being vocal and visible about that creates a little bit more space in the middle ground, where some of the people in the middle are going to take a step closer to me than towards, the abusive overculture. So, I'm over here. I don't know anybody who cuts another woman down because of her age or her looks or whatever, but I know that happens in the in-between space, and I understand why, and I have a lot of compassion for it. So, it's sort of like, come on in. We're in the big tent over here with Mary Magdalene, listening to her stories and, listening to the apostle to the apostles who has been written out of history. And we're having a good time. We're going to get t-shirts,
Exactly. Well, I love the way that you think. I love the way that you put intention into everything that you're doing. And I believe that the people that are going to be drawn to you are going to be all of us who want to really, like I said, not live in survival consciousness, but to live in the consciousness of being able to accept and acknowledge that we're all connected. And therefore, it is a love consciousness. Some would call it the Christ consciousness, whatever your language is for it. But getting to that place where we can all come together and really love and appreciate one another. I believe love is the strongest weapon that we have in our arsenal, which is why I proudly call myself a love warrior, and I lead love warriors. And I believe that we will prevail, and we will leave this planet better than we found it, if in fact we're willing to do what we need to do to unearth our authentic selves. And that's where the secret lies. Get rid of these versions that we keep creating, and stop listening to the messages that tell us woulda, shoulda, coulda, ought to, but listen to what is really there and what is true and what we can find in ourselves in the stillness that will lead us forward. And fear has a role. Fear has a role. Sometimes fear wakes you up. But once you wake up, get moving.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think for me, like, I don't know if we will prevail, but I believe we can. And it's a moral imperative for me that we attempt to do so, or at least I attempt to do so. So this is where, like, your work, Dr. E, it's like, what numbers am I? What do I need to do? Because I've done the Enneagram so many times, and I don't really know what I am. I feel like I'm like such a blend. I have, numbers that are all very similar. And so it's like I can vacillate even sometimes between like what should our strategy be? But ultimately what I know is it's going to take many strategies, and maybe I'll do lots of different things on my path. I'm like kind of one of those multi-passionate people. But ultimately the thing that keeps me going is, even if we don't prevail, this is the right way. It feels like biologically right in my body. This is how I have to be in the world. Is I have to try. I have to try because of that deep yearning and desire, and like moral compass, ethical compulsion that I want the best of us to survive. That just feels biologically right in my body. So I don't know what that makes me, but
that's interesting, because your words that you're speaking right now are giving me some very clear clues as to what your Enneagram energy might happen to be. But my gift to you will be, you and I will sit down and do a one-on-one, and we will work this out.
We'll figure it out.
Because with all the other gifts that you have, I would be so honored to give you the gift of finding that energy that is dominant in you, because that is only going to make you even more powerful in what you're already doing. And with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for this. You have spoken truth to hurting hearts today, and truth can be a soothing balm when you've ingested too many lies. So continue doing what you're doing. You and I have a date coming up in the very near future. We're going to sit down and we're going to do some Enneagram work together. And in the meantime, your new book is
Spells for the Apocalypse, Practical Magic for Turbulent Times. It's available everywhere. But check your library. I love libraries. So check your library. Ask your library to bring it in. Thank you.
I'm doing that too. Libraries and small bookstores, I'm actually calling small bookstores now and asking them to carry my books. Because I think that, whatever we can do to help people to thrive and the small businesses to be successful, that's equally as important. So thank you for your time. Love you so much, and can't wait for our little secret one-on-one.
Oh my gosh, me too. Thank you so much, Dr. E. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Humanity Mosaic Podcast with Dr. E. For more information, please visit DeborahEgerton.com, and be sure to check out the AuthenticSelfCommunity.com to continue your journey.